I'm going to be recording the webinar so that the people who they had registered, I have a couple people who registered, they can't make today, so I'm going to send it out to them after. So this webinar is being recorded for that purpose. All right, so let's just make sure you can see my screen here. I get somebody to just type in the chat there that you can see my screen. Awesome. All right. So thanks so much for joining the call. We are, it's really great to have so many people come, and I get really excited when I get to talk about this content because I've been learning it and continue to learn it. Been a student for over 10 years, and I have such a strong belief that the more people that have access to this information, the more that we can do for our daughters. So it's part of my movement to spread love. So thank you so much for being here. All righty. So before we get started, I'm just going to take a second here to talk about who am I. Give you a little bit of context there. I am a certified life coach with a background in human behavior and psychology, and I developed a passion for relationship coaching. Relationships are such a huge part of human beings and the human experience. And so it's very rewarding to get to work with people to develop healthy relationships, to attract healthy relationships, or to make a relationship healthier, whether it's mother-daughter relationships or relationships at work or love relationships. It's extremely rewarding. I'm also the international host of Relationship TV. My counterpart in the U.S. is Dana Hammond, who does the Marriage Boot Camp with Dr. Phil. And together we take turns providing content and insight into relationships for the folks with the Healthy, Wealthy, Wise coaching program. I'm also the co-founder of Girls Change the World, which is a one-day workshop that I put together to bring mothers and daughters together, focusing on learning about where feelings come from and how to communicate with each other and to build confidence. I'm a life book graduate, which essentially means that I spent a lot of time practicing and learning how to methodically explore life. And I get to use that with my clients to help them figure out where they want to go. What else can I tell you? Well, I'm the author of an upcoming book, The Other Side of Loneliness. It should be out next year. It's aimed at young girls to tell the story of how we pass through feelings and phases in our life, and there's always the other side. But most importantly, the hat that I wear that drives me to keep learning, to continue to be my best self, and the hat that made me recognize how important love is. I'm a mother of not one, not two, but 3 daughters. So you can probably guess why I've devoted over a decade to learning about what makes us happy and how we can help our daughters. You're in the right place if you have a daughter or a significant relationship with a young female. Sometimes we forget that you don't have to be a mother of a daughter or a father of a daughter to make a significant impact in someone's life. You're in the right place if you've already experienced or if you're expecting to experience some big emotions in your house. Or if you want to just get a little more insight into what's going on in your daughter's mind. And you're definitely in the right place if you want to just do whatever you can to help your daughter grow into a confident girl. What you're going to learn today. So today we're going to talk about where happiness comes from. My mom always used the word attitude, watch my attitude, and it kind of seemed like a watered down way to say stop throwing yourself pity parties. But today, science has come so far, and researchers have actually been able to get into our thoughts and our minds to know where happiness really comes from. And myself, I love quantifying this information. I love the data behind it. But I'm going to share both sides of the happiness equation and maybe get you thinking a little differently about your daughter's happiness. We're going to talk about what can get in the way of your daughter's happiness. Once we laid out some of those fundamentals of happiness, we'll talk about what can get in the way and what's happening in her mind, why it's sometimes really hard to reel her back in, and and why it's not craziness, by definition anyway. We'll talk about what gets in the way. And then we're going to talk about what you can do to grow confident girls. Regardless of how happy or where your daughter is at today, there's some tools and techniques that we can use to keep that path open, the path to confidence and happiness, that place that you want your daughter to be. We don't get to have the final say in how it all turns out, and I'll explain that a little more later, but there are some things that you can do to make that path more walkable. So where does happiness come from? The actual source of happiness can be much more easily quantified today because of this technology that I was referring to earlier. But us humans still have a funny way of thinking about happiness. Maybe you've heard some of these philosophies or even had them yourself. For sure, your daughter has had them. We have this tendency to think about happiness as something that we're pursuing, something that we're after, something that's around the corner. So maybe you've heard stories or phrases like, I'll be happy when I lose 10 pounds, or I'll be happy when I get a bigger house, when I pay off my car, when I get a promotion. I'll be happy when the kids are back in school or out of school. Happiness seems to be just around the corner. Or sometimes we think about happiness as an if-then statement. If only my boss would recognize me, then I would be happy. If only I had more money, then I would be happy. I wonder if this sounds familiar to you. I bet it does. But have you ever come to the other side of a when I dream? You know, maybe you got that bigger house or you paid off your car, that thing that you said, when I do this, then I will be happy. And the question I have is, were you incrementally and everlasting happy? Probably not. And there's a few reasons for that. One is because we all have this thing called a happiness set point, and we're born with it. We're actually genetically programmed for a certain amount of happy. Similar to how our bodies always seem to tend to a certain weight, our minds tend to a certain amount of happiness, and genetics drives that. So in the graph that I'm showing, consider that to be the stable line that's in the middle there. That's your happiness set point. And as things happen to us, oh, I got a question here. I'm just going to check. Sorry. Got a question. Hand raised. All right. We have a hand up. If you have a question, if you can type it into the chat, and I can answer it there. For some of the people who got here later, on the chat screen, you have the option to type in that screen. You can just type it in right there. All right, I'm going to give you a second and see if there's any problems. No? All right. So back to the happiness and programming. So we're genetically programmed with this happiness set point. And then as things happen to us, either good or bad, our happiness levels might lift or fall in the short term. So we pay off our car and we're pretty happy, but we always come back to that set point or pretty close to it. So when you get that bigger house, maybe you're happy for a little while, but then that house becomes part of normal life. It's not new and exciting anymore, and it starts to blend in. And now there's a new if only. Maybe if only the kitchen sink had a carburetor. Us human beings forget very quickly, and over time we normalize those things that maybe at one time gave us so much happiness. And it's got a name for it too. It's called hedonic adaptation, which is kind of fun to say. So now you've got that word in your vocabulary. You know, like my new treadmill used to make me so happy to look at, but now it doesn't do anything for me anymore. Damn that hedonic adaptation. I'm sure you'll be saying it over coffee this weekend. So if only and when I statements are in fact myths. Those things that you think will make you happy only make you happy in the short term, and then they become like wallpaper. On the other side of that, those things that bring you down only bring you down for a short term, and then you normalize again. Of course, there's exceptions, but as a general rule, the research demonstrates that this holds true. Oh, and while we're on the topic, you know that if I had more money theory, you can guess it, right? All bets are off. After a household income hits about $70,000, studies have shown over and over that after a household income hits that level, there's no significant increase in happiness. economic behaviorist Daniel Kahneman. He's got some interesting research on the U-curve, but I won't bore you with that research now. You can read it in his book, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. So why am I telling you this? Why am I talking about your happiness set point and hedonic adaptation? When you understand what makes us tick, us as humans, where happiness really comes from, then you can start to understand more about what makes your daughter tick. And we'll talk about how you can use this in just a bit. All right, so where does happiness come from? So we talked about genetics and our happiness set point. We talked about circumstances, the good and the bad things that happen, and it's clearly going to have some impact on our happiness. And the third one is our thoughts and behaviors, or what my mom used to call my attitude. But here's something you might find surprising. I've got a pie chart here, and I'm not sure I've mentioned yet, but I really love pie charts. And we can see it's all sliced up. So take a quick guess on what percentages those sources make up. Let's see how you, let's take a guess. We've got 40%, 50%, 10%. And I'm actually going to open up a little poll here just for fun. So you can go in and tell me what you think where happiness comes from. So on your screen there, you should see a poll. And if you think 40% is genetics, 10% is your thoughts, and 50% is your circumstances, or where do you think that switch is? I'll just give you a second to click it in and answer. All right. All right. Awesome. Nice. That's awesome. So 50% genetics, 40% is your thoughts, and 10% is your circumstances, which is really cool because that means that 40% is in our control. So if we can get into those thoughts and behaviors, we can have the biggest impact. So understanding and helping our daughters to be aware of their thoughts, that's where the power is. And that's what we're really going to be talking about today, is the thoughts and the feelings. All right, so let's talk about the thoughts and the feelings. This model was introduced decades ago, and it's really held up. So this cognitive behavior triangle indicates that your thoughts affect your feelings, your behavior affects your feelings, and your feelings affect your thoughts and your behaviors. But most of the time, this triangle is just a plane running on autopilot, and we're not really slowing down things to hear the thoughts that are creating the feelings. We just feel, and then we might behave. And I keep using the pronoun we, and I'm doing it on purpose. I mean to do that. This is what all humans do. So not just your daughters, but you and your partner and your coworkers. This is what all humans do. It's the way that our DNA is wired, and it's part of the reason we've survived for so long. We've got programming that works fast. We make quick reactions to things going on around us, and it's helped us avoid to get eaten by things like saber-toothed tigers. We don't waste time paying attention to things that we're used to and that we've identified as non-threatening. But we do pay attention to new things, and we do pay attention to things that may threaten us, either our physical self or our sense of self. So all humans have this genetic wiring to think fast and respond, and your daughter is no different. I'm likely going to point this out a few times throughout because it's important. Just because our primal brains are wired to respond this way doesn't mean that it's out of our control or that it's okay to act like a wild animal. But knowing this sure helps us explain some of the crazy reactions we see when someone's feeling threatened, whether it's their sense of security, their sense of worth, their sense of justice. That's just their animal instincts kicking in with their genetic programming, and that has them thinking and acting fast, not logically. In our workshops, we talk about the monkey brain and have a little fun with it to give a mother and a daughter the ability to poke fun at the other person's monkey brain that's just acting a little primal. The tricky part is that it's hard to convince your daughter that possibly, just possibly, the things that she is saying aren't really how she feels, or that the thoughts driving her feelings, that those might not actually be true. How often have you been involved in a conversation where your daughter said things that weren't true or was passionately arguing about something that she couldn't really possibly care that much about? Or a conversation that she just couldn't say. She was sorry. She could not get those words out of her mouth. How, I'm sure it's happened. I know it's definitely happened for me with three daughters at home. But how likely is it that you could just interrupt your daughter as all these feelings are coming out of her mouth and have her actually hear the suggestion that there might be another side to her story? I it's really not likely to be received well, right? It's more likely to incite a bunch more feelings. In the Girls Change the World workshop, I asked the girls, have you ever said something that you don't mean, or have you ever felt like words are just pouring out of your mouth and you didn't even know where they were coming from? Or maybe you did something that you weren't proud of, or got in an argument that you just couldn't stop arguing even when you realized that you actually didn't believe what you were saying. So I go around the workshop and we ask this question, and when we start talking about it, it's always the same. Of course they have. And in a workshop where it's neutral territory and we spent the day kind of poking fun at our human flaws, it's not hard to admit it there in that room. They'll admit it. There are grins around the entire room as mothers and daughters are remembering that their own individual story of a time where an argument just didn't really make much sense. So can you think of a time that this has happened in your house? I really bet you can. But I want to know. It's fun to get a little bit of feedback from you guys. So I'm going to launch another poll here to see if you've ever found yourself in an irrational argument with your daughter. That should pop up here for you. I'm curious. Ever been in an irrational argument with your daughter? Yes, 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 and yes. Well, at least I know that my assumptions were correct. Awesome. So yes, 100% yes. So it happens all the time. And what's happening there is that your daughter's brain is operating on this pattern of programming that's having words come out because she's operating on a flight or fight response. And so she's not really thinking about what she's saying. Again, it doesn't make it okay, but at least we kind of know what's going on. Alrighty, there's our poll. So let's talk about what gets in the way. So we've spent some time talking about where happiness comes from, but what's getting in the way? Our minds are going so fast, and your daughter's mind is going so fast with all the things that are going on. We are constantly reacting. There's so much going on at any given time that we tend to not really think about whether we've got the appropriate reaction or the healthy reaction. And our daughters are the same. They have so much going on in those growing minds as they experience the new events in their life for the first time often, that of course they aren't always thinking clearly. Humans aren't designed to think clearly first. Remember that evolution programmed us to survive so that those saber-toothed tigers didn't come and eat us. We didn't stop to think about whether or not there actually was a danger. We just react when we thought there might be. Let's see if this story resonates with you at all. It's 5:30 in the evening and your daughter is hanging around the kitchen counter and she's grazing at the different dishes that you've been putting together as you get supper ready. And she strikes up this casual conversation about school, and then suddenly it takes a turn out of nowhere and your daughter starts complaining about how often her friends get to go out and how she doesn't get to go out. And she talks about how there's a party coming up and she wants to go. So you're just trying to get some information about this party. So without answering her question right away, you ask a couple of questions. Where is it? Who's going to be there? And then suddenly that daughter that was sitting there chomping on a carrot stick is suddenly replaced from a child from another planet. She angrily accuses you of never letting her do anything, not trusting her, and rhetorically asks you why she got stuck with this family. Why this family? She wishes she were part of the Johnson's family. Does this resonate with anyone? And again, if you have any comments or questions, by all means, feel free to add them in the chat there. I'd love to hear from you as we're going through this. Don't be afraid to add your stories. So I'm sure that this has happened in some semblance of this example. The way that would unfold in a stimulus in the triangle that we talked about earlier is there's this event, this stimulus, that you not saying yes right away. So she's expecting an answer, she doesn't get it. That prompts a quick thought process, maybe one of how unfair it was that she's not going to get to go. That then generated a feeling, in this case of being mad, and then the reaction. So you see how this works? You say something, something happens around us, we quickly and automatically interpret that something, and then we have a feeling. And then oftentimes we'll have a behavior that will follow. It's this chain reaction of events with that interpretation being the key. The interpretation, the way that we interpret the situation. So let's go another example of this. An event, like a friend walks past you on the street without saying hello. And then there's an interpretation or that thought that's instant and quick. She's ignoring me because she's angry with something I've done. And then it generates a feeling, like I'm worried or I'm upset. But that thought process is instantaneous. It is so fast that it's basically friend walks by you and now you're worried. And you are faced, as a parent, you're faced with dealing with the worried part because that's what presents itself. And all of us have this model playing out in our minds at any given event. And it's so important to recognize it in our daughters because if we can understand this model of how this chain reaction works, it gives you the opportunity to start to reprogram those thoughts and some of the beliefs that your daughter has that are generating those emotions. So we're talking about reprogramming, essentially, for self-awareness. And our brains are, we're going to talk a little bit about how our brains get programmed, but this is a slow process, and it takes time. And it takes the process of asking questions and having conversation as your daughter starts to become more and more self-aware, to say, you feel this way, what were you thinking? I see this feeling in your anger. What's making you feel that way? So if you start treating the feelings as more of a waving flag that says, hey, something's going on here and we need to work through it, then you can have those conversations that can change future outcomes. So it's not about the feeling itself. It's about the feeling that represents some sort of thought that's happening so quickly. So remember, they see or experience something. Their autopilot minds quickly interpret it in their own unique way, and then they have a feeling and usually a behavior. And remember, this happens in a split second, particularly if there's a lot of stress going on or if they aren't connected to their feelings. This is a process of developing self-awareness. And I say process because you can't force your daughter to become aware. You can't tell her that her thoughts aren't valid. You can't imply that she doesn't know what she's talking about. If you ever tried that, you'll see the reaction you get. All of those attempts to try and force someone to become aware or to point out you have to be careful because it can erode trust and generate a resistance as they're building their own sense of independence. Autopilot is in charge until your daughter decides to take the reins. So instead, imagine it more of like watering your garden. When an opportunity presents itself, like a weed poking through the soil, you can ask questions about what should be done. But it's going to be up to your daughter whether she pulls that weed out or not. But one thing you can be sure of is that those conversations she won't be able to avoid it. Those conversations will have her paying more attention when those weeds do come up, all on her own. Hence the self-awareness part. There's this cycle of awareness. So if you're talking to your daughter about how their thoughts are influencing their feelings, and you're using those feelings as a trigger to talk about their thoughts, you're starting to create this cycle of awareness that can be used all throughout life in terms of, I had a feeling, it's good or bad, I don't want to feel that way, what caused that feeling, what's true. And we'll talk more about this. So for your daughter, this is a chain of events that they experience all day long. If they're caught up in a string of thoughts that are causing them to feel stress and panic, you can use the signs of anxiety to dig into their thoughts and to help them find solutions. They see or they experience, they think, and they feel. So when your daughter becomes aware of healthy ways that she can process her emotions and understand where emotions come from, she's going to develop a sense of control and empowerment. And I got this attitude. I've seen this before. And it's going to reduce the impact that those events, that person walking across the street, those feeling generating events, it's going to reduce the impact that those have on her happiness. Those highs and lows on that happiness set point will start to be a little more stable. And this is one of the ways that we can grow confident girls. Just raising some self-awareness and emotional intelligence. But thoughts are tricky. We interpret that event, some words or look, the thing that happened, and then we use our own unique programming and belief system. And so no two people experience the same interpretation of any event. So in that example of the friend walking down the street, for one person, that might cause a reaction of worry or anger, and in another person, it might have absolutely no reaction because they just thought the person was busy or had something on her mind. So you can see that two people can have several interpretations. Every event can have several interpretations, and people will have different ones. And your daughter is constantly interpreting those events based on her own unique programming. So why is it so tricky? It's tricky because people don't usually know what they're thinking or why they're thinking it. We're busy and we're thinking fast, and we're not really paying attention to the thoughts that are creating our feelings. We're going so fast that we just don't really stop to think the thought that's happening, and it passes so quickly through our neural pathways that we only know something happened because of the feelings that come up. We have a feeling, and clearly something just happened, but I'm just dealing with the mad. And it's not easy to go backwards and say, okay, I'm mad, what did I think? It's not as easy as you think. So not only are we not really programmed to think slow and to pay attention to the thoughts and beliefs that are going through our minds, but for our daughters, they are only beginning to develop the cognitive skill that to be able to understand the thoughts that are going on in their mind. So they have a lot going against them for them to be able to slow down and process. Last week, I was sitting at the table and I noticed my middle child. She was looking really sad, and she was reacting to everything that went on. And she would just end up in a puddle of tears if her cup was too close to her plate. I was just stumped. So I asked her, what's wrong? I said, it seems like you're having some big feelings. Are you sad? And my 7-year-old daughter, she slumps her shoulders and tears are streaming down her face as she sobs out loud, I don't know what's wrong. At 7, she doesn't have the words to explain why she's having the feeling she is. She doesn't have the mental maturity to hear those thoughts. All she has is this big set of feelings that's causing a heavy heart, and she feels even worse because she can't explain it. So whether we're going so fast we don't pay attention to the thought that creates the feelings, or we have so many feelings we can't sort it out, we don't always know what interpretations we're making of any event. We only have the feeling that remains behind. Kind of like the smell of an old garbage in the kitchen after you pulled the bag out of the can and taken it to the curb. You can't remember what was in the garbage, but it sure stinks. Very similar to that. So this is where I like to talk about the lie in your truth. The thing that I want to really leave with you guys today is that thoughts are not conjured up as a reflection of reality. Thoughts are a reflection of your unique programming and belief system. And this goes for parents as well. So therefore, your thoughts are not the truth. And it's important to recognize that your daughter's thoughts aren't actually her truth, but until she thinks or believes differently, she believes them to be her truth. When in fact, thoughts are never true or false, but they're helpful or harmful, because thoughts come up because of your programming and beliefs, and whether or not your programming and beliefs are doing what you need is the question. What this means is that if you tell your daughter that her thoughts are either right or wrong, it's not going to get you the desired outcome, because actually you can't answer that. They're neither right nor wrong ever. They're only helpful or harmful. The goal is to help your daughter realize that her thoughts could be helpful or harmful, and they're just as likely to be true as not, and that you have a choice. And that's really where this all comes to, is to start asking questions around some of the thoughts that are creating the feelings in a way that starts to create curiosity about whether they're doing good things for you or bad things for you. You could choose to think that person walking across the street was mad at you, but you don't know that to be true. So you could choose to think she was busy. And when our daughters learn that they have a choice, they start to get that sense of control and empowerment that they can back up and choose how they want to feel. And once you've created some distance from the feeling and you've focused on the thought rather than the feeling itself. So I see you're mad, but let's go to the thought. I see you're sad, but let's go to the thought. If you can focus on the thought to understand it and maybe get them marveling at the possibility that that interpretation might not be true, then you're going to free them from that feeling and they can move forward with just a little less weight. And your daughter will start to learn about that choice, but slowly and over time. Because as human beings, we really think that we're right. We really do. As we get older, maybe we're more easy to let go of that right, but as a child, it is very important to be right. We drill into our children, right or wrong, right or wrong. And it's important to them to be right. And so if we try to question their feelings or their thoughts in a way that makes them feel that they're not right, they're going to hang on to them. Hence the reason that our daughters can get into fights for 3 days, because they're right. Even though they feel terrible, at least they're right. It's a predicament for them for sure. And it takes a process of just slow conversations to get them thinking that there might be another possibility. So we have covered a lot. We're about 75% done here. I've left some time at the end for questions. But I just wanted to take a quick step back and check on the chat bar here and see if we've got any questions coming in, any comments, some stories here about other daughters. Thanks for sending those. All right, how do you ask about the thought without triggering an emotional overload, without her thinking that you're deciding what emotion she is feeling? Oh, great question. Great question. So every conversation is different and every daughter is different. And sometimes you're not going to bring up anything. You're not going to, in the heat of the moment when they're already emotional, you know, it might not be the time to bring it up, to just, and we'll talk more about how to deal with these situations, but later on to go back to it and use it as an example when you're in a conversation, and we'll talk more about that. But you have to first have established kind of the boundaries of those conversations, and your daughter needs to know what's happening. So we'll get to that a little bit in a few slides here. Great question. And I'll come back to make sure I've answered it. So thank you. And if there's any more questions, just keep them coming. Let's just cover a little bit here about what we've talked about. So we've got nature or genetic programming plays a role in your daughter's happiness. That happiness set point is real, and you just have to be aware that it's there. Happiness derived from circumstance is fleeting and unreliable. And every once in a while we can kind of drip that idea on our daughters about the time that she got that thing she wanted really badly and how it's just kind of normal now. So yes, she was super excited, and I know you want that iPod really, really badly. I know you're so excited about it. But remember the time you got the new shoes that you really, really wanted? Like, let's remember that that's not going to make you happy forever. There's an opportunity to start replanting seeds that grow more happiness and confidence. by helping them to recognize those thoughts and behaviors that are affecting their happiness. I talk mostly about thoughts. Behaviors warrant some discussion as well. If a child is sitting slumping around, their feelings will start to they'll start to feel somber and lazy. But if they get up and move around, that will actually help them. But I like to focus mostly on thoughts because that's the part we can't see. So nature genetic programming plays a role in your daughter's happiness. Happiness derived from circumstance is fleeting and unreliable. There's a lot of interesting studies on that, by the way, about marriage and relationships and income. Economic behaviorism has covered a ton. And there's an opportunity to just start replanting seeds with our daughters to grow more happiness and confidence as they become more aware. So where do thoughts come from? So unique programming, they interpret events in their own special way, can't necessarily understand that. So what gets in the way of happiness, and where do those thoughts come from? Like I've mentioned, your daughter is interpreting events at lightning speed based on her own unique set of programming. So where did that unique programming and set of beliefs come from? Patterns are largely established by the age of 5. And what that means is we start to identify when this happens, then that happens. If I drop something off the table, it falls. If I smile at someone, they smile back. If I push them, they cry or hit me back. I start to develop these patterns of cause and effect. But before she was 8 years old, your daughter had pretty much already formulated most of her beliefs around how the world works. She's developed her own unique sense of what pretty means or what it means to be a girl. She's learned what it means to be good and kind, and she started to form definitions of right and wrong. By 8 years old, your daughter has a working schema on what to expect and what the rules are. And she's got an idea of how she should be and how people should be before she's 8 years old. Before she was 8, she incurred a value system that drives her sense of justice and what's fair. And by 8 years old, she's making sense of the world through the experiences that she's had to that time. So those beliefs and values, they act like nutrients in the soil. As your daughter grows and experiences life, the beliefs filter how she interprets the events around her. So if Auntie Jenny used to tell her that she was really good at sewing, she might have developed the belief that she wasn't smart. We don't know. If a classmate told her that she was a bookworm, she might have a belief that she could never fit in. If you told her that she was a kind and caring person, she might have a belief that, hey, I'm a good person. Those beliefs filter the interpretations. So for example, if your daughter has a belief that she's a nerd and a bookworm, walking through a crowded hall while a group of classmates look over at her and giggle, that might generate a feeling of loneliness or being an outsider. But for a girl that believes she's a good person, that same event, that same thing might generate a feeling of happiness to see someone giggling, and they wouldn't even personalize it. Beliefs influence thoughts, and thoughts create feelings. Children are born blank slates. And through the thousands of conversations and experiences that they have up until that 8-year mark, unfortunately, you just can't know which conversations and which experiences wrote on that blank slate and stuck. That seemingly harmless comment about how it was lazy of her to not pick up her backpack is just as likely to have created a belief around the value of tidiness as it is to have created a belief that she's a lazy person. You can't know. You can be as careful as you like about what you say and what you do, and you can try to shelter her from some mean interactions in those early years, but you're not going to be able to shelter it all, and you don't get to decide what events write on her belief system and create those beliefs that are going to generate those thoughts, that are going to generate those feelings. You see how this goes? Tricky, hey? So your daughter got a set of beliefs and values that influence how she interprets the events around her, and those are real to her. You only know that there are unhealthy or harmful thoughts and beliefs by some of the feelings that you're encountering and you're experiencing and the frequency of those feelings. So these are the nurtured elements. We talked about the natured elements. These are the nurtured elements. Beliefs that get programmed because of experiences, those are the nurtured elements. But there's more natured elements. What else gets in the way? I've got to mention these things, of course. I mean, we all know that it's real. The movement for a child from childhood to adolescence. Michael Gurian, he's the author of this book called Wonder of Girls. It's an amazing book, by the way. I highly recommend it. He describes this transitioning phase from child to adolescent as one of the most traumatic phases in a girl's life. The only one in comparison is premenopause, which at least by that time we've had some life experience and some years to prepare for it, right? Adolescence, without getting into too many details, it's very real. What's happening in the brain development, it's happening in so many different areas. And as a girl is trying to make sense of an adult world and her brain is not developed fully in the way of an adult and it's constantly changing, no wonder it gets in the way. As a girl moves from child to adolescent, these are the years that they're going to experience some issues in self-esteem, which are inevitable. And Michael, he's got some really interesting ideas on self-esteem. It's part of growing up because anytime a person attempts something for the first time and it doesn't go as planned, self-esteem is going to take a hit, right? And your daughter is doing a lot of things for the first time during these years, navigating the social environment and trying new activities. And of course, there's their changing bodies. So it's very very real, the adolescent in puberty. And then that cognitive triangle, which happens all throughout life affecting everyone, that automatic thinking, I mean, it happens to adults in unhealthy cycles as well, right? And it continues to affect adults if people aren't taking the time to slow down. So something that everyone is dealing with is getting in the way of your daughter's happiness, further complicated by the actual biological and the social and the neurological growth that's happening as your daughter's growing up. It's a really tricky time. You can see why some of our daughters feel a little out of control. But the superpower that we can bring into our families and our communities is that there is a choice, that those feelings are okay, they happen, but there is a choice, and you're not a slave to your thoughts and your feelings, and you can choose to be happy. What do I mean by this? Uh, Imagine that your daughter just gave an angry remark about her coach on her baseball team. The anger is the feeling that's being expressed. How can you acknowledge the anger but not make it bigger or give it more attention than is necessary, right? We don't want, like, it's a thing, it's happening, but we don't need to we don't need to grow it. It's just, there it is. You can acknowledge the feeling by saying something like, it seems like you're feeling really angry. What's got you feeling so angry? Like the anger, it's happening, acknowledge it, but what's got you feeling so angry? Or if the comment was inappropriate, like too much anger, I can see that you're angry, and that's fine to feel anger. That's healthy, but it's absolutely not okay to yell at me. What's got you feeling so angry? By acknowledging that you're acknowledging your daughter's anger, or any feeling for that matter, as just a sign rather than the problem itself, then you can start to model an entirely different way of thinking, right? Because you're going to teach your daughter to get curious about the feeling itself rather than to allow it to consume her. Yep, that's anger. Why is it here? As opposed to, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry. Yep, that's anger. Why is it here? And you can use language like this in your conversations that reinforce the fleeting nature of feelings, how they come and go. Yep, there it is. Okay, it's gone. And we don't have to hang on to them if they aren't making us feel good. Talk about how the different feelings have been passing through the day and get curious about what feelings will come tomorrow, because there's going to be new ones, or some of the same old ones. Remember that demonstration of a feeling is only a sign that says, hey, I just told myself a story and it's got me feeling not great. And you can start to get her to question, is this how I want to feel? Let's unwind this one more notch. It would be great if you could simply say, hey, dear daughter, you're telling yourself some story that's making you all upset. Is it possible that there's a different explanation that might not get you so upset? Well, remember, it's not that simple. Your thoughts create your feelings, and your thoughts aren't real. But you just can't tell your daughter that her thoughts aren't real, because they're real, I guess, to her, but not necessarily true. They're only hopeful or harmful. So how do we grow confident girls? First, by recognizing the role that the cognitive model plays in your own life as a parent or a mentor. You too are going to be experiencing that see, think, feel, react effect as you experience your daughter's emotions. So being able to slow down to recognize any negative feelings coming up is going to help you choose a reaction that will more likely create the outcome that you really want. So first things first is to recognize that it's happening for both you and your daughter. And next, keep in mind the elements in this reaction, the event, the thoughts, the feelings, the behaviors. What you see from your daughter's behavior is just the outward reaction of a feeling. What you want to do is get your daughter to think about those fast thoughts and beliefs that generated it, because that's where the information lies. And if the language that you use in your conversation personifies feelings as a separate thing, there it is. Your daughter can start to feel a separation and detachment, and then she's not going to feel owned and consumed. All right, so we learned about where happiness comes from, how we have a happiness set point, how our circumstances influence our happiness, but how our thoughts are the biggest controllable variable in our happiness quotient, to use some mathematics. We talked about what gets in the way of our daughter's happiness and how thoughts happen so quickly. Let's talk about how some simple things to keep in mind to give you the best chance of growing confident girls. Remember that the see, think, feel, behave chain reaction is there, and it may get in the way of healthy conversations. So what can you change in yourself or in the circumstance to be more aware of and create an environment of open communication? Thoughts are neither right nor wrong, nor up for debate. The one question to try to get your daughter to consider for herself is this thought or belief helping me? Debating her thought or belief system is going to lead to more arguments, and it's not up to you to change her mind, and you aren't likely to be able to. Think about it. Have you ever dug your heels in over something that you believed? It's a typical response and a likely response if you just outright call out a thought or belief as garbage. So raise a question instead. Is it possible that there might be another story? Or if it's something you know to be false, like you never let me do anything, well, then you can gently remind her about the time that you actually did let her do something and how that's not entirely true. It might feel like it, but it's actually not true. This is my favorite. Big feelings are okay. One of the common results of big feelings is that society often encourages children to repress their emotions. Hold yourself together, we say, or don't cry, don't get mad. The idea is partly healthy because we have to learn how to control our emotions and recognize them and then make conscious choices about the reaction. And there's lots of studies about emotional intelligence and its link to success and happiness in life. But sometimes a situation requires you to cry or get mad. It warrants it. So allowing your children to go ahead and get mad and then helping them to understand how they can do it in a healthy way. Give your daughter permission to feel, to process the emotion. Maybe she doesn't know what she feels and she just needs to cry. So put on a sad movie and have a cry together. Maybe she gets angry and she needs to let it out. Get her to punch a pillow or a punching bag. Your daughter will know the difference between hitting a person and hitting an object as she matures. So don't worry about her punching her teacher in the face just because she hits her pillow. Feelings need to be processed. If you've watched Inside Out, it's such a great movie. You know how important it is for those feelings to have their turn. If you haven't watched it, watch it with your daughter. It is such a great movie to help the conversation along. So give your daughter permission to feel and help her learn how to express her feelings in healthy ways. Create opportunities for conversations outside of the heated moment. Start a project together, maybe making friendship bracelets or baking a pie, some sort of situation that doesn't feel like an interrogation, right? And it allows for a natural working together so that you're not staring at each other across the table and getting all uncomfortable. And then as you casually work on your project, just share how much love you have for her and how much you want her to enjoy her time growing up. Use examples of arguments or times that didn't go well to demonstrate opportunities for there to be less friction and resistance in her life. And start the conversation to let your daughter know that there's a different way to approach feelings, and use all these opportunities to share some of what you learned today. So look for opportunities to create those conversations. This is my favorite. Okay, they're all my favorite. Come up with a shared way to call a timeout when the feelings are hot and automatic thinking has taken over. So rather than letting a situation escalate or you end up getting engaged in a no-win battle, have you ever found yourself like arguing with an 8-year-old and wondering, wait, I'm the parent. Why am I arguing? If you have a shared signal, it tells each other that you recognize it's getting out of hand and it allows you to save space. And what I mean by that is your daughter's ego won't like being called out in the middle of an argument, and she's likely to dig in deeper. So having a shared signal allows you to wave that proverbial white flag that says disengage, and then we can re-engage in a healthier way. There's a few different ways to do this, but let your daughter come up with a secret signal. Then it's her idea. And finally, lead with love. For all the fears a parent has for their children, for all the things you want for them, a parent has tough choices to make in trying to create the environment and the relationship and to establish the appropriate boundaries that give your daughter the best chance of success. Keep in mind that your daughter goes through a very intense developmental period as she grows up, and especially as she moves into puberty. And remember that your daughter is programmed with a set of beliefs that took years to develop. And reprogramming takes time and patience. And no matter how much your daughter starts to push away and pretend she doesn't need you, know that the role that you play as their steward is the most important role. And don't do it alone. Find other individuals who can be role models, mentors, and support for your daughter, and then create opportunities for them to spend time together. Sometimes your daughter doesn't want to share everything with you, but an auntie or a family friend, she'll share with them. And then be that role model or mentor or support for daughters in your community. Like I said, even if it's not your daughter, you can make a huge difference. It takes a village to raise a child, and every child needs to feel the support and love of their community as they grow. And that's how we grow confident girls. Just one more moment about the Lead with Love. I've got the Spread Love initiative, and there's a handout attached to this webinar, just with some examples of language replacement. And I grew up in a family of a lead with discipline type mentality. But I was raised with the idea that children will grow stronger and more independent if you have a strict adherence to boundaries. But after a decade of research, there's so much evidence that says be the safe place to fall, and it will have more positive, lasting effects. So I've got a handout. Feel free to download it. I'd love to hear your thoughts after the webinar if you want to send me some comments. And every child is different. Every conversation is different. So one size does not fit all. But instead of like don't cry, try I see that you're sad. What's making you sad? Or don't yell at me. I see that you're angry, but we don't talk to each other like that. And if you're not able to stick around to solve the problem, then I can't help you. So there's some examples on that handout there that you can try and use. And just to wrap it up, this is my Spread Love project. I am super passionate about helping our daughters realize how much love exists for them, how much support they have in the world. Every time the Kids Help Phone just released their 2016 report, and it's devastating. So whatever we can do to spread love and let our daughters know today, not when it's too late, that there is a lot going on in their minds, and it's okay. It's okay to have big feelings, and there's somewhere that they can turn. And we're just wrapping up here. We've covered a lot. As part of my Spread Love project, I run a mother-daughter workshop where I bring mothers and daughters together into a full-day hands-on workshop where they learn how to communicate, where feelings come from, how to recognize feelings, and to spend some quality time connecting with conversations. The next one is September 18th out here at Ignite Retreats, which is outside of Toulon. And then we're heading to Regina on October 18th. And then in November, October 16th, not 18th. And then in November, I'll be hosting a Girls Change the World half-day session for young daughters age 5 to 8 out here in Toulon area. So if you're interested in learning more, there's the website. And thank you again for being a part of it. Let's go and see if we have any questions here. There's one. Is there any helpful tips for daughters who stress so much making decisions as they worry about the consequences? Oh, good question. A lot of this, what I would recommend is to go through the thought process, right? What are the thoughts? What are the thoughts that are making you feel stressful? What are you worried about? Is that likely to happen? How likely is that to happen? Is it possible that that wouldn't happen? Which way has you feeling better? Thinking that the most terrible outcome is going to happen or it possibly wouldn't happen? And starting to back them up so that they can realize the difference in the choice that they have. Any other questions? Oh, right. Yes, it's how do you don't want to make the decision, but you want to guide her to make it on her own. Exactly. And it's not it's 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 through that process of a conversation to get them to go through it all to say, what are you worried about? And what do you want to have happen? And what scares you more? Hopefully that answered your question. Is there any other questions from the group here? All right. If not, well, I thank you so much for being a part of the webinar. I am such a big believer that the more people that have, and even if it's something you refresh, maybe some of this information isn't brand new to you, but to bring it back top of mind, you can guarantee that your next interaction, you've got this sitting at the top of your mind, and you will have a different response. It's incredible what happens when you raise up these back to top of the mind. So if you have any questions, by all means, send them out. At the end of the webinar here, you should see a survey. I'd love to get your thoughts. And thank you so much for joining the webinar. Have a great evening.